The rain pounded against the tin roof of the auction barn, creating a rhythmic sound that echoed through the dimly lit space. Weathered men, their faces marked by years of hard work, leaned against the wooden railing, watching the last few horses being presented in the center of the arena. Standing on damp straw was a chestnut-colored horse with a dull coat and tired eyes. His ribs were visible beneath his skin, and his tangled mane hung lifelessly over his neck. He looked like he belonged to another time, an animal forgotten by the world. Thomas Morgan stood at the back of the crowd, his calloused hands thrust deep into the pockets of his worn denim jacket. At 60 years old, his face was weathered from decades spent under the Kentucky sun, but his eyes remained sharp and observant. He'd spent his entire life around horses, training them, caring for them, understanding them in a way that seemed almost mystical to others. But times had changed, and his small farm was struggling to stay afloat in a world that valued speed and efficiency over tradition and care. The auctioneer, a thin man with a patchy mustache named Virgil Henshaw, tapped his gavel against the podium and announced without much enthusiasm, "And here we have an unregistered horse, old no-known pedigree. Let's start at $50. Any one." Silence filled the barn. The buyers had come for strong pedigreed horses, not a creature that could barely hold its head up. Thomas studied the animal carefully, noting how despite its poor condition there was something dignified in the way it stood patient, waiting as if it knew something the rest of them didn't. $50. Thomas called out, his voice cutting through the quiet. A few muffled chuckles rippled through the crowd. "Morgan and his strays," someone muttered, but Thomas ignored the whispers. He'd built a reputation over the years for taking in animals others had given up on. Some called it foolishness. He called it decency. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Sold to Mr. Morgan!" As Thomas approached to claim his purchase, Virgil leaned over the podium. "You sure about this one, Tom? Looks like he's got one hoof in the grave already." Thomas ran a gentle hand down the horse's neck, feeling the animal tense slightly at his touch. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Virgil, even the forgotten ones." The drive back to his farm was slow and methodical. The old truck rattled along the dirt road, its headlights cutting through the thick evening fog. The rhythmic sound of hooves shifting against the rusty trailer echoed in the night as Thomas gripped the steering wheel with one hand, the other resting on the worn leather of his bench seat. The weight of the auction still sat heavy in his chest. He had no business buying another horse, especially not one in such poor condition. His farm wasn't what it used to be. The barns were aging, the fences needed fixing, and money wasn't as easy to come by these days. But something in the horse's eyes had struck him deep. It wasn't just exhaustion or neglect. It was something else. Something he couldn't quite place. "What am I going to do with you?" he murmured, glancing in the rearview mirror as if the trailer might offer an answer. The rain had softened to a drizzle by the time he pulled up to his farm. The wooden gate creaked as he swung it open, the mud thick under his boots. He backed the trailer in, switched off the engine, and stepped out, breathing in the damp scent of earth and hay. The farm was quiet, except for the distant hoot of an owl and the soft rustling of trees in the wind. Thomas unlatched the trailer's door and stepped back. For a moment the horse didn't move. He stood there, his ears flicking at the sounds of the night, his breath coming in slow, heavy puffs. Then, with an almost reluctant step, he walked down the ramp. Thomas watched as the horse hesitated, then lifted his head slightly as if taking in his surroundings. The dim barn lights cast a golden glow over the paddock, revealing more of the horse's condition. Up close, Thomas could see old scars along its legs, a faded white stripe running down its forehead. His ribs pressed against his skin, but despite his frail appearance, there was strength in the way he moved, controlled, deliberate, as if each step carried purpose. "Well, guess we better get you settled in," Thomas muttered, patting the horse's neck gently. The horse flinched at the touch, not in fear, but in a way that made Thomas pause. It was almost as if he was waiting for something. Thomas led him into the barn, guiding him into an empty stall. The old wooden walls smelled of hay and rain-soaked earth. He filled a bucket with water, watching as the horse took a cautious sip before stepping back. He wasn't desperate or frantic like most neglected animals. He was controlled, composed. Thomas folded his arms, studying him. "What's your story, boy?" The horse simply blinked at him, his deep brown eyes unreadable. It was only then, as Thomas leaned against the stall door, that he noticed something strange, a marking partially hidden beneath the mud and grime caked onto the horse's side. It was faint, almost invisible under the dim barn light, but there was no mistaking it. It was a brand, an old, weathered brand. Thomas's heart skipped a beat. That mark, it was familiar, too familiar. His stomach twisted as memories he had long buried clawed their way to the surface, and for the first time that night Thomas felt something close to fear. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the brand on the horse's side. He stepped closer, brushing his calloused fingers over the faded marking, clearing away some of the dried mud. His breath hitched. The shape was unmistakable, a circle with an arrow through it, Westbrook Stables. Thomas took a slow step back, his pulse quickening. Westbrook Stables was one of the most prestigious racing operations in the country, a place known for breeding champions for selling horses worth more than entire farms like his. But how in the hell did a horse from a place like that end up half-starved at a backwoods auction for $50? The realization sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't just some nameless, unwanted horse. This animal had a history, one that someone had clearly tried to erase. Thomas swallowed hard. He needed answers. He turned toward the tack room, where an old, dust-covered filing cabinet sat wedged between stacks of forgotten saddles and rusting tools. His hands trembled slightly as he rummaged through a drawer filled with faded documents and dog-eared auction catalogs. He had spent years attending sales, keeping notes on bloodlines, brands, and barns. It was a habit from when he used to dream big, back when he thought he might make a name for himself in the horse world. Flipping through the brittle pages, his eyes darted from one old listing to another, and then, suddenly, there it was, a photograph of a younger version of the same horse. His coat was shining, his muscles lean and defined. He was standing tall, a champion's fire in his eyes. Below the picture, the name was printed in bold, elegant letters: Pathfinder, sired by Iron Legacy, owned by Westbrook Stables. Thomas exhaled sharply. He had heard that name before. Hell, everyone had heard that name. Pathfinder wasn't just some horse, he was a legend. 5 years ago, he had been one of the most promising racehorses in the country, known for coming from behind in impossible races defying odds. People called him the horse with heart. But then one day he disappeared. No one knew why. The racing world had whispered rumors, an injury, a scandal, a cover-up, but no solid answer ever came. Until now. Thomas looked from the old photograph to the frail, tired creature standing in his stall. It seemed impossible. How had this once great champion fallen so far, and why had someone wanted to get rid of him so badly? The horse Pathfinder stood quietly in the stall, watching him with those deep, knowing eyes. Thomas felt a chill crawl up his spine. Somewhere, somehow, someone didn't want this horse to be found, and now he was tangled up in something much bigger than he ever bargained for. Thomas sat at his worn wooden table, the dim glow of the farmhouse lamp casting long shadows across the room. The old racing catalog lay open before him, Pathfinder's picture staring back as if demanding answers. His mind raced. How had a horse once worth millions ended up abandoned at a backwoods auction, sold for pennies? And more importantly, who had let that happen? Outside, the barn creaked as the wind howled through the trees. Pathfinder was settled in for the night, but Thomas couldn't shake the unease crawling through his chest. He reached for the old rotary phone on the wall, his fingers hovering over the dial. There was only one person he could call. With a deep breath, he dialed. After 3 rings, a voice answered. "You still alive, Morgan?" Thomas huffed. "Nice to hear from you too, Henry." Henry Davis had once been a top trainer in the racing world, back before a messy falling out with Westbrook Stables. He and Thomas went way back. Both men had started their careers around the same time. But while Thomas had chosen the quiet life of a small-town farmer, Henry had climbed to the top. Until he wasn't at the top anymore. "Tell me you didn't just call me for a bedtime story." Henry's voice was gruff, laced with suspicion. Thomas leaned forward, gripping the receiver. "I bought a horse today. Old, neglected, had a brand I recognized." Silence. What brand? Thomas hesitated. Westbrook Stables. A sharp exhale on the other end of the line. You sure? Positive. And I think it's Pathfinder. The line went dead quiet. For a moment, Thomas thought Henry had hung up. Where are you? My farm, but listen, Henry. I'm coming. The line clicked dead. Thomas sat back, exhaling slowly. Whatever was going on, Henry clearly knew something, and judging by his reaction, it wasn't anything good. The next morning, just as the sun began to break over the hills, a battered black pickup truck rolled down Thomas's long dirt driveway. Henry stepped out, his tall frame stiff with tension. His once dark hair was now streaked with gray, and deep lines creased his face. He looked around warily before striding toward the barn. Pathfinder stood in the stall ears, flicking forward as Henry approached. For a long moment, Henry simply stared at him. Then, in a low voice, he murmured, "Son of a bitch, it really is him." Thomas crossed his arms. "Tell me what's going on, Henry. Why would a horse like this end up abandoned?" Henry dragged a hand down his face. Because Thomas Pathfinder wasn't just thrown away, someone made sure he disappeared. Thomas felt a chill settle in his bones. And if they find out he's still alive, they'll want to finish what they started. A tense silence filled the barn, broken only by the occasional sound of Pathfinder shifting in his stall. Thomas studied Henry's face, searching for answers. The older man looked shaken. Truly shaken, and that wasn't something Thomas had seen in him before. "Start talking, Henry," Thomas demanded, his voice low. "Who would want to get rid of a horse like this, and why?" Henry exhaled sharply, running a hand through his graying hair. "Westbrook Stables isn't just any racing operation. It's got power money and a long history of covering up things they don't want the world to know." Thomas narrowed his eyes. "And Pathfinder?" Henry hesitated, then turned to look at the horse, his expression unreadable. 5 years ago, he was their golden boy, fast, strong heart like no other. But then right before the Belmont Stakes, he disappeared." Thomas frowned. "Disappeared? You're telling me they lost $1 million racehorse overnight?" Henry shook his head. "No, they didn't lose him. They buried him." A heavy weight settled in Thomas's chest. "There were rumors," Henry continued. "Some folks said he was injured and Westbrook didn't want the bad press. Others thought maybe he tested positive for something that would have ruined their reputation. But I never bought those stories." Thomas leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. "Then what do you think happened?" Henry glanced around the barn as if expecting someone to be listening. "I think Pathfinder saw something he wasn't supposed to." Thomas scoffed. "He's a horse, Henry. What the hell could he have seen?" Henry's jaw tightened. "I don't know. But I do know that Westbrook doesn't just throw away champions. If they wanted him gone, they had a damn good reason." Thomas glanced at Pathfinder. The horse stood still, watching them with those deep, intelligent eyes. Something about the way he carried himself, the quiet control, the sharp awareness, it was unlike any horse Thomas had ever owned. "So what now?" Thomas asked. "What do I do with him?" Henry's voice was grim. "You either hide him or you find out the truth. But either way, Thomas," he met his eyes, his face deadly serious. "If Westbrook finds out Pathfinder is still alive, they won't just come for him. They'll come for you too." A cold knot of fear twisted in Thomas's gut. He had spent his whole life keeping his head down, staying out of trouble. But now, without meaning to, he had walked straight into something dangerous, and there was no turning back. A cold wind swept through the open barn doors, rattling the wooden beams overhead. Thomas felt the weight of Henry's words settle deep in his chest. "They'll come for you too." The thought sent an uneasy shiver down his spine. He had never been the kind of man to go looking for trouble, but somehow trouble had found him anyway. Pathfinder shifted in his stall, his ears twitching as if sensing the tension in the air. The old horse was no ordinary animal. Thomas was sure of that now. But whether he was a key to some buried secret or just an inconvenient reminder of something Westbrook Stables wanted to forget, one thing was clear. Keeping him here was a risk. Henry let out a slow breath and turned toward the barn entrance, his boots crunching against the straw-covered floor. "You have no idea what you're caught up in, Thomas." "Then tell me." Thomas said, his voice firm. What the hell am I up against? Henry hesitated before glancing toward the horse once more. Westbrook Stables isn't just a racing operation. They've got deep pockets, high-powered connections. They've covered up scandals before. If Pathfinder is still alive, it means something went wrong with their plan. Thomas frowned. Plan? You think they meant to kill him? Henry's expression darkened. Maybe, maybe not. But one thing's for damn sure, if they let him go, it wasn't out of kindness. A tense silence filled the barn. Thomas leaned against the stall, his arms crossed tightly. His farm had always been his sanctuary, his escape from the world. But now it felt different, exposed, vulnerable. A sudden noise outside made both men turn their heads sharply. The distant sound of tires crunching over gravel. Thomas's heart pounded as he stepped toward the barn door, peering out into the morning light. Headlights. A black SUV was crawling down the long driveway, moving slow, deliberate. Damn it, Henry muttered under his breath. They already know. Thomas clenched his jaw. He had lived a quiet life for decades, avoiding trouble. But now he was standing in the middle of it, and the men in that SUV weren't here to make conversation. He turned back to Pathfinder, who stood tall and still in his stall, watching everything with quiet intelligence. What the hell did you get me into, boy? The SUV came to a stop. The engine idled, and then a car door opened. The low rumble of the idling SUV sent a pulse of unease through Thomas's chest. He wiped his hands on his jeans, forcing himself to stay calm. Whoever these people were, they weren't here by accident. Henry's jaw tightened. Stay quiet. Let me handle this. Thomas wasn't so sure about that, but he nodded. A second car door opened. Two figures stepped out, both men dressed too clean for farm life. One was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black wool coat over an expensive-looking shirt. The other was shorter, wiry, with sharp eyes that flicked toward the barn like he already knew what was inside. Thomas stepped onto the porch, his boots scraping against the wooden planks. Something I can help you with? The taller man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You Thomas Morgan? Thomas took his time before answering. Who's asking? The man in the wool coat pulled a sleek leather wallet from his pocket, flipping it open. Robert Westbrook. I run Westbrook Stables. His voice was smooth, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to command attention. Thomas's stomach twisted. Westbrook. The man standing on his porch was the Robert Westbrook, the same man whose stable had produced dozens of champion racehorses, a man who rarely left his Kentucky estate unless it was for something that truly mattered. Thomas forced his expression to stay neutral. Didn't expect to have company this early. Westbrook smiled again, tucking the wallet away. Apologies for the hour. I won't take much of your time. I just have a few questions. Thomas crossed his arms. About what? Westbrook's gaze flickered toward the barn. I believe you recently acquired a horse at auction. Thomas felt Henry shift slightly beside him. I pick up horses all the time. Westbrook's smile never wavered. Of course. But this particular one, I think he might have belonged to us. Thomas's pulse pounded in his ears. He knew this was coming, but hearing the words made his skin prickle. That's so, Westbrook nodded. We had a horse go missing some years back, Pathfinder. A real beauty, but he vanished without a trace. Never knew what happened to him, that is, until we heard a certain farmer picked up an old chestnut with a very specific brand. Thomas swallowed hard, keeping his expression unreadable. And if I do have him, Westbrook's smile faded slightly, then I'd like to buy him back. I'll pay well far more than whatever you spent at auction. Silence. Henry finally spoke, his voice low. Seems funny, Mr. Westbrook, that a horse like that would just go missing. Westbrook barely glanced at him. I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to take back what belongs to me. Thomas clenched his fists at his sides. Every instinct told him not to trust this man. Pathfinder wasn't just a lost horse to Westbrook. He was a problem. And problems like this didn't get a second chance. I appreciate the offer, Thomas said carefully, but I'm not looking to sell. The wiry man beside Westbrook finally spoke, his voice colder, sharper. That's a mistake. A long silence stretched between them. Westbrook exhaled through his nose, adjusting the cuff of his coat. Think it over, Mr. Morgan. But I'll warn you, some things are better left buried. He turned without another word, walking back to the SUV. The wiry man hesitated, eyes locking onto Thomas like a silent threat, then followed. The door shut, the engine revved, and then just as quietly as they came, they were gone. Thomas let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Henry muttered a curse. That wasn't a request, that was a warning. Thomas turned back toward the barn, his jaw set. Then they just made a mistake, too. Because if Westbrook wants to keep something buried, I'm damn sure going to dig it up. The distant hum of the SUV's engine had long faded into the night, but the weight of Westbrook's words still lingered in the cold air. Thomas stood on the porch, staring down the empty road, his jaw tight. Every instinct in him told him one thing: Westbrook wasn't done. Henry let out a slow breath beside him. You know what this means, right? Thomas nodded, his eyes dark with determination. Yeah. They don't just want Pathfinder back. They want him gone. Henry gave him a sharp look. And you're not thinking of giving him up, are you? Thomas turned, walking toward the barn. Hell no. Inside the old wooden structure was dimly lit, the scent of hay and horse sweat filling the air. Pathfinder stood in his stall, ears twitching as Thomas approached. The horse had been watching them the entire time, silent, waiting. Thomas placed a firm hand on his neck, feeling the warmth beneath his palm. You've got a story to tell, don't you, boy? Pathfinder exhaled, his breath hot against the cool air. Henry leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. If you're serious about this, we need to figure out what Westbrook's hiding. Thomas nodded. And I know where to start. The next morning, Thomas and Henry sat at the worn wooden table in the farmhouse, a laptop open between them. The glow of the screen flickered across their tired faces as they scrolled through article after article, searching for any mention of Pathfinder's disappearance. Most of the reports from 5 years ago followed the same script: tragic lost champion gone without a trace. Mystery surrounds Racehorse's fate, but none of them had answers. No official statements from Westbrook stables, no evidence of injury, no explanation for how $1 million horse could simply vanish. Henry grunted. They scrubbed the story clean. Thomas rubbed his temple. There's got to be something they missed. Then, buried deep in the search results, he found a small, forgotten blog post from a former track employee. He clicked. The page loaded slowly, the text grainy and cluttered with ads. The title read, "The Night Pathfinder Disappeared, What Really Happened." Thomas and Henry exchanged glances. Thomas started reading aloud. I worked at Westbrook Stables for 3 years. I saw things I wasn't supposed to see, and the night before Pathfinder disappeared, something happened at that barn. Something bad. A cold chill ran down Thomas's spine. The post went on to describe a heated argument between Robert Westbrook and an unknown man. The employee claimed he had overheard snippets of their conversation, something about a deal gone wrong and someone paying the price. But the most chilling part was at the bottom of the post. Pathfinder didn't just disappear. He was meant to disappear. And I think someone died that night because of it. The word sent a shudder through the room. Henry leaned back, exhaling sharply. Son of a bitch! Thomas's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. This isn't just about a horse. This is about something bigger. Henry nodded. And if Westbrook is willing to go this far to keep it quiet. Thomas looked toward the barn, where Pathfinder stood oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Then we're in a hell of a lot more danger than we thought. The farmhouse felt smaller, the air heavier. Thomas stared at the words on the screen. Pathfinder didn't just disappear. He was meant to disappear. And I think someone died that night because of it. Henry let out a slow breath, his fingers tapping against the table. Westbrook didn't just cover up a missing horse. He covered up a crime. Thomas's jaw tightened. And if someone died, it means there's proof somewhere. We just have to find it before they find us. A sudden knock at the door made them both freeze. It wasn't frantic, but it wasn't friendly either. Henry moved first hand instinctively, reaching for the rifle leaning against the wall. Thomas peered through the small window. A young woman stood on the porch, her dark jacket soaked from the misty morning air. She looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot, but when she saw Thomas watching, she lifted her chin with quiet determination. Thomas hesitated before pulling the door open. "Who are you?" The woman swallowed hard. "My name is Sarah Mitchell." The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Henry stiffened beside him. Sarah's voice was firm but urgent. "I know about Pathfinder, and I know why Westbrook wants him dead." Thomas exchanged a glance with Henry, then stepped aside. "You better come in." Sarah sat at the kitchen table, gripping a mug of coffee as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. "Thomas Mitchell was my father," she said, her voice quieter now. "He worked for Westbrook Stables for years. But 5 years ago, something changed. He found out something he wasn't supposed to. And then one night, he never came home." Henry exhaled sharply. "The same night Pathfinder disappeared." Sarah nodded, eyes dark with grief. "Westbrook said it was an accident, that my father was drunk and fell from the hayloft. But my dad didn't drink, and he sure as hell didn't fall." Her hands trembled as she pulled a small flash drive from her jacket and placed it on the table. "This has security footage from that night. My father must have known something was coming because he hid this before they got to him. It shows everything: Westbrook arguing with my dad, the fight, and what happened after." Thomas stared at the tiny piece of plastic and metal, knowing it held the key to everything. Proof. "This could bring Westbrook down," Henry muttered. But before anyone could move, the sound of tires on gravel reached them. Henry rushed to the window, his face darkening. "Black SUV. Same as before." Sarah's breath hitched. "They found me." A gunshot shattered the front window glass, spraying across the room. "Move," Henry yelled, grabbing Sarah by the arm and pulling her toward the back door. Thomas didn't think. He just acted. "Get to the barn. We ride." Another shot rang out as they ran, but Thomas wasn't worried about himself anymore. They weren't just coming for them. They were coming to finish what they started. Gunfire shattered the night as Thomas, Henry, and Sarah bolted toward the barn, their breaths ragged. A bullet struck the truck's windshield glass, raining onto the mud, but Thomas didn't slow. Pathfinder was their only way out. He threw open the stall door, locking eyes with the horse. The fire was still there, the heart of a champion. No saddle, no time. Thomas swung onto his back, Sarah scrambling up behind him. Henry mounted another horse just as Westbrook's men rushed toward the barn, guns raised. "Go!" Thomas kicked Pathfinder's sides, and the old racehorse exploded forward, as if he had never stopped running. Hooves thundered against the rain-soaked earth, his muscles working in perfect rhythm. The SUVs skidded through the mud, headlights bouncing wildly as they struggled to keep up, but they had no chance. Pathfinder was built for this. Ahead, the railway bridge loomed, a death trap of rotting wood and rusted rails. It was their only shot. Pathfinder lunged onto the bridge hooves, landing firm on the unstable planks. Thomas held his breath as the boards groaned and splintered beneath them. Henry's horse followed just as the first SUV screeched to a halt at the edge. Then, crack, a massive section of the bridge collapsed into the raging river below. Westbrook's men stood stranded, their path destroyed. They couldn't follow. Thomas pulled Pathfinder to a stop, his hands trembling as he patted the horse's damp neck. Henry's breath was heavy beside him, Sarah still gripping his waist. They turned back to the wreckage, the bridge now nothing but debris. Sarah exhaled shakily. "We made it." Thomas looked down at Pathfinder, the horse standing tall, unshaken. A slow smile crossed his face. "Hell of a run, old man." They found shelter in an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the woods, miles from the main roads. The one-room structure was dusty but dry, offering temporary refuge from both the rain and their pursuers. Thomas built a small fire, while Henry secured the horses in a lean-to behind the cabin. Sarah sat on a wooden stool, her fingers clutching the flash drive like a lifeline. Her face, illuminated by the flickering flames, was a mixture of determination and fear. "They killed my father," she said, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "They've been searching for this footage for 5 years. I've been hiding, moving from place to place, trying to find someone who would believe me." Thomas settled across from her, his weathered face solemn. "Why didn't you go to the police?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "I tried. But Westbrook has half the county in his pocket. The investigation into my father's death was closed within days. Accident, they said. Case closed. Henry entered shaking rainwater from his coat. Horses are settled. We should be safe here for the night, but we'll need to move at first light. Westbrook won't give up easily. Thomas nodded, then turned to Sarah. How did you find us? I've been monitoring news about Westbrook for years, looking for anything unusual. When I heard rumors about a horse matching Pathfinder's description showing up at a small auction, I knew it had to be connected. She paused, looking between them. But I don't understand, how is Pathfinder still alive? Everyone believed he was dead. Thomas exchanged a glance with Henry. That's what we're trying to figure out. Westbrook clearly went to great lengths to make the world think Pathfinder was gone. Henry leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Question is why? What could a horse have seen that was worth killing over? Sarah pulled a laptop from her backpack. Let's find out. She inserted the flash drive, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. My father encrypted this. It's taken me years to figure out how to access it, but I've finally managed to crack part of it. The screen flickered to life, displaying grainy security footage. The timestamp showed 11:42 p.m. June 15th, 5 years earlier. The camera angle captured a section of Westbrook's main stable. Thomas and Henry moved closer, eyes fixed on the screen. Two figures appeared, one tall and commanding, unmistakably Robert Westbrook. The other, a middle-aged man with a stable hands uniform, had to be Thomas Mitchell, Sarah's father. They were arguing intensely, though the footage had no audio. Can you enhance this? Thomas asked. Sarah shook her head. This is as good as it gets. The original files were damaged. They watched as the confrontation escalated. Mitchell pointed repeatedly toward one of the stalls, Pathfinder's stall. Westbrook's body language became increasingly threatening. Then, Mitchell pulled something from his pocket, looked like a small vial. Henry leaned forward. What's that he's holding? My father was the head groom. He kept records of everything given to the horses, Sarah explained. He was meticulous about it. On screen, Westbrook suddenly lunged at Mitchell, grabbing for the vial. The struggle was brief but violent. Westbrook shoved Mitchell hard, sending him staggering backward against the railing of the hayloft. Then came the moment that made Sarah gasp. Westbrook deliberately pushed Mitchell over the edge. The camera caught his fall, the sickening impact as he hit the concrete floor below. Jesus, Thomas whispered. The footage continued. Westbrook checked Mitchell's body, then looked directly at the camera. His face showed no remorse, just cold calculation. He disappeared off-screen, returning moments later to drag Mitchell's body away. He didn't even call for help, Sarah's voice cracked. He just disposed of him like trash. The next segment of footage showed something equally disturbing. Westbrook returned to Pathfinder's stall, accompanied by a veterinarian they didn't recognize. The horse was sedated, then loaded into a trailer. The timestamp showed 3:17 a.m. That's the last we see of Pathfinder on any of the cameras, Sarah said. The next day, Westbrook held a press conference announcing that Pathfinder had died suddenly of a heart condition. There was even a memorial service. Thomas ran a hand through his gray hair. But why keep him alive? If they wanted to silence the horse, why not just put him down? Henry's eyes narrowed. Insurance fraud maybe collect on a multi-million-dollar policy while selling the horse overseas on the black market. Sarah shook her head. No, there's more to it. The rest of the files are still encrypted, but I've found references to something called Project Thoroughbred. Whatever it is, my father discovered it, and it got him killed. The cabin fell silent except for the popping of the fire. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Thomas stood moving to the small window to peek through the tattered curtains. The forest was dark, the rain having subsided to a gentle mist. No sign of pursuit yet, but he knew better than to feel safe. We need to figure out what Westbrook is hiding, and fast. The longer we have Pathfinder, the more danger we're in. Henry nodded grimly. But we also need proof that will stick, something that even Westbrook's money can't bury. Sarah looked up from the laptop. There's a veterinarian doctor, Eleanor Winters. She used to work for Westbrook but left suddenly around the same time my father died. She might know something. You know where to find her? Thomas asked. Last I heard, she had a small practice about 50 miles north of here. If anyone would know what Project Thoroughbred is, it would be her. Thomas glanced at Henry, who nodded in agreement. First light, then. We head north. As dawn broke, casting long shadows through the trees, they prepared to leave. Thomas checked on Pathfinder, who seemed remarkably recovered after their desperate escape. The old champion stood taller now, his eyes brighter as if the run had awakened something long dormant inside him. You remember who you are, don't you? Thomas murmured, stroking the horse's neck. Pathfinder nickered softly in response, nudging Thomas's shoulder with his muzzle. Henry approached, leading his own mount. We should avoid the main roads. Westbrook will have people looking everywhere by now. Thomas nodded. We'll follow the old logging trails. Take us longer but safer. Sarah joined them, tucking the flash drive securely into her jacket pocket. I've been thinking, what if Pathfinder wasn't the only horse? What if whatever Project Thoroughbred is, it involved other horses too? Thomas considered this. You think Westbrook was experimenting on his horses? It would explain why they faked Pathfinder's death rather than actually killing him, Henry said thoughtfully. Maybe they needed him alive for something. They mounted up Thomas and Sarah on Pathfinder Henry on the other horse. As they set off through the misty forest, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading toward something much darker than they had initially imagined. The journey north was slow and cautious. They kept to dense forest paths, avoided clearings, and crossed roads only when absolutely necessary. By midday, they reached a small town where Henry ventured in alone to purchase supplies and gather information. He returned with food, water, and a troubled expression. Westbrook's got people everywhere. There's a reward out for information about a stolen horse and 2 fugitives. They're claiming Sarah's wanted for theft and you for assault, Thomas. Thomas's jaw tightened. Typical. Turn the victims into criminals. There's more, Henry continued, distributing sandwiches wrapped in brown paper. I overheard some men at the general store talking about Westbrook stables. Apparently, they've been buying up smaller breeding operations all over the state, and they're not just acquiring the property, they're specifically taking the stallions with certain bloodlines. Sarah frowned. My father mentioned something about selective breeding in his notes. He was concerned about how aggressive they were being with their breeding program. Selective for what, though? Thomas wondered aloud. They continued northward as afternoon faded into evening. The landscape changed from dense woodland to rolling pastures dotted with small farms. They kept to the tree lines skirting properties, always watching for signs of pursuit. It was nearly dusk when they crested a hill and saw a modest farmhouse nestled in a valley below. A small sign at the end of the gravel drive read, Winter's Veterinary Services. That's it, Sarah whispered. Dr. Winter's place. They approached cautiously, tying the horses in a copse of trees a short distance from the house. Thomas led the way, alert for any signs of danger. The farmhouse looked peaceful. Warm light glowed from the windows and smoke curled from the chimney into the twilight sky. Before they could reach the door, it opened. A woman in her 50s stood in the doorway, a shotgun held casually but unmistakably at the ready. Her silver-streaked dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes were sharp, assessing. I was wondering when someone would come, she called out. I've been expecting a visitor since I heard about Pathfinder. Thomas stopped, raising his hand slightly to show they meant no harm. Dr. Winters. She nodded once. And you must be the farmer who found him. Along with Henry Davis, been a while, Henry, and... Her eyes landed on Sarah, softening slightly. You look like your father. Sarah stepped forward. You knew him. Thomas Mitchell was one of the few honest men at Westbrook Stables, Dr. Winters replied, lowering the shotgun slightly. His death wasn't an accident. I'm guessing you know that or you wouldn't be here. We have proof, Sarah said. Security footage from that night. Dr. Winters glanced around, scanning the darkening landscape. You'd better come inside. It's not safe to talk out here. The interior of the farmhouse was warm and cluttered with books, medical journals, and equine memorabilia. Dr. Winters led them to a small sitting room, setting the shotgun within easy reach against the wall. "Westbrook's people came by yesterday," she said without preamble, "asking questions about a stolen horse. Said they'd make it worth my while if I reported any sightings." Henry tensed. "Did they suspect you knew something?" "If they did, they didn't show it. But Robert Westbrook doesn't trust anyone, especially not people who've left his employment under strained circumstances." She turned to Sarah. "I'm sorry about your father. He was a good man. He tried to warn me, but I didn't listen until it was too late." "Warn you about what?" Thomas asked. Dr. Winters sighed heavily, sinking into an armchair. "Project Thoroughbred. It started as legitimate research exploring ways to enhance racehorse performance through selective breeding and nutrition. But then Robert became obsessed with creating the perfect racehorse, one that could win every time." "That's impossible," Henry scoffed. "Even champions lose races. Not if you're willing to cross certain lines, Doctor." Winters countered grimly. "About 6 years ago, Robert brought in private researchers, converted one of the back barns into a lab. They started experimenting with performance enhancers, not just the usual stuff that might slip past racing commission tests, but new compounds, genetic modifications." Sarah leaned forward. "And my father found out." Dr. Winters nodded. "Thomas was responsible for the daily care of Westbrook's top horses, including Pathfinder. He started noticing changes, behavioral issues, physical abnormalities. He kept detailed records, took samples. That's what got him killed." "But why Pathfinder?" Thomas asked. "What made him so special?" "Pathfinder was their greatest success," Dr. Winters explained. "Most horses couldn't tolerate the treatments. They'd develop fatal heart conditions, neurological problems. But Pathfinder thrived. His performance improved beyond anything we'd seen and without the side effects that plagued the others." Henry frowned. "So why fake his death? Why not just keep racing him?" "Because Thomas Mitchell had evidence that could link Pathfinder to the illegal experiments. If racing authorities had tested him, they would have found traces of the treatments. Westbrook's entire operation would have collapsed." She looked at them gravely. "They couldn't kill Pathfinder. He was too valuable as a breeding stallion for their continued experiments. But they couldn't race him either. So they created a cover story and removed him from public view." "Then how did he end up at that auction?" Thomas wondered. "My guess is that after extracting what they needed, likely his genetic material for breeding, they planned to dispose of him quietly. Something must have gone wrong." Dr. Winters paused. "Or someone with a conscience intervened." Sarah opened her laptop, showing Dr. Winters the security footage. The veterinarian watched with a grim expression, nodding occasionally as if confirming what she already suspected. "There's more," Sarah said, "but I can't unlock the rest of the files." Dr. Winters studied the screen. "Your father mentioned a backup of his research, said he'd hidden it where only the honest would find it. I never knew what he meant." Thomas felt a sudden chill. "The horse," he said quietly. They all turned to him. "Pathfinder. What if the evidence is with him? Somehow Mitchell knew the horse was going to disappear. What better place to hide something than with something everyone thinks is gone?" Dr. Winters' eyes widened. "The brand," she whispered. "Thomas was in charge of branding at the stable. He had access to all the equipment." They hurried outside to where Pathfinder was tethered. In the beam of a flashlight, Thomas carefully examined the branded mark he'd noticed that first night, the circle with the arrow through it. "Look closer," Dr. Winters urged. "The Westbrook brand is just a circle. The arrow was added." Thomas traced the mark with his fingers, feeling a slight ridge around the arrow portion. "It's not just a brand," he realized. "It's a scar hiding something." Dr. Winters hurried back to the house, returning with medical supplies. With expert hands, she carefully numbed the area, then made a small incision along the arrow line of the brand. Thomas and Henry held Pathfinder steady as she worked the horse, remarkably calm under her touch. "There's definitely something here," she murmured, probing gently. "A small object embedded just under the skin." With surgical precision, she extracted a tiny metallic capsule, no larger than a grain of rice. Inside was a microchip sealed in waterproof casing. Sarah's hands trembled as she took it. A data chip. This could be what we need to unlock the rest of the files. Back inside, they connected the chip to Sarah's laptop. Immediately, the encryption on the remaining files began to clear. Documents, photographs, and more video files appeared on the screen. A damning collection of evidence documenting years of illegal experimentation, animal cruelty, and finally, murder. My God, Henry breathed, scrolling through chemical formulas and test results. This goes beyond performance enhancement. They were creating drugs that could be undetectable in standard testing, marketing them to other racing operations. Thomas pointed to a financial ledger. Look at these payments, millions flowing through offshore accounts. This isn't just about winning races, it's a full-blown criminal enterprise. Sarah found a folder labeled Contingency. Inside was a video file, a message from her father recorded the night before his death. They watched in stunned silence as Thomas Mitchell's face appeared on screen, his expression grave. "If you're seeing this, then I'm probably dead," he began. Robert Westbrook has turned thoroughbred racing into a laboratory for dangerous and illegal experimentation. Horses are dying, and those that survive are suffering. I've compiled evidence of everything: the drugs, the genetic manipulation, the bribes to racing officials. It's all here. He held up a vial, the same one they'd seen in the security footage. This contains the latest compound they're using. It creates temporary enhancement without any immediate side effects, making it virtually undetectable during standard race day testing, but the long-term effects are devastating. The video continued, Mitchell detailing names, dates, and specific incidents. He ended with a personal message to his daughter. "Sarah, if you find this, take it to federal authorities, not local. Westbrook can't reach as high as Washington. And remember, I did this because some things matter more than self-preservation. The truth matters. Justice matters." The room was silent as the video ended. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, her grief mixed with pride. Dr. Winter spoke first. "We need to get this to the FBI immediately. This isn't just animal cruelty or race fixing, it's organized crime." Thomas nodded, but his expression was troubled. "Westbrook will be watching the roads, monitoring communications. Getting to the FBI won't be easy." Henry paced the small room. "We need a diversion, something big enough to distract Westbrook while we get this evidence to the authorities." "The Kentucky Derby," Dr. Winter said suddenly. "It's 3 days from now. Every major figure in racing will be there, including Westbrook. He never misses it." Thomas considered this. If we could publicly expose him there with the media present. "It would be too public for him to stop," Sarah finished. "But how do we get in? Security will be tight." A slow smile spread across Henry's face. "I still have connections at Churchill Downs. People who owe me favors." He turned to Thomas. "But we'll need Pathfinder." "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked. Henry's eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. "We're going to give them the story of the century, the miraculous return of a champion everyone thought was dead, and the criminal who tried to bury him." As night deepened, they gathered around the kitchen table, planning their dangerous gambit. Outside, Pathfinder stood watchful in the makeshift paddock, his powerful frame silhouetted against the starlit sky, a living ghost about to return to the world that had mourned him. The morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect Kentucky spring day. Thomas stood at the window of Dr. Winter's spare bedroom, watching as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the rolling pastures. In 3 days, they would either bring down one of the most powerful men in racing or join Thomas Mitchell in paying the ultimate price for crossing Robert Westbrook. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Sarah entered, clutching a stack of printouts. "I've been going through my father's files all night," she said, spreading the papers across the bed. "There's something else here. Something I missed before." Thomas moved closer, studying the documents. They were medical reports on various horses from Westbrook stables, all showing similar anomalies. Elevated heart rates, abnormal blood work, increased muscle density. "These aren't just performance enhancements," Sarah explained, pointing to highlighted sections. "According to my father's notes, Westbrook wasn't just trying to create winning racehorses. He was using them to test compounds for human application." Thomas's eyebrows shot up. Human doping. She nodded grimly. Elite athletes' military contracts, the potential market is enormous and completely illegal. That explains the offshore accounts and shell corporations, Thomas muttered. This is bigger than race fixing. Henry entered carrying mugs of coffee. Got through to my contact at Churchill Downs. He can get us service credentials for Derby Day, but that's as far as his neck will stretch. It's enough, Thomas said. We don't need to get into the winner's circle, just close enough to be seen and heard when the moment comes. Dr. Winters joined them, her expression troubled. Westbrook called an emergency board meeting at his stables for this afternoon. My sources tell me he's accelerating something called Phase 3 of Project Thoroughbred. We need to move faster, Henry said. If Westbrook suspects we have evidence, he'll destroy everything before Derby Day. Thomas paced the small room. We need insurance, something public, something he can't easily disappear. Sarah's eyes lit up. What if we leak part of the story now? Not enough to show our hand, but enough to create public interest. Henry nodded slowly. I know a journalist, Rebecca Carson. She's been trying to crack the racing industry's dark side for years. If we give her just enough to run a teaser, it might force Westbrook to focus on damage control rather than hunting us, Thomas finished. It's worth a shot. Dr. Winters looked skeptical. It's risky. Westbrook has threatened journalists before. Then we make sure what she publishes can't be traced back to us, Sarah insisted. Just enough to create questions, get people talking before Derby Day. Thomas nodded. Do it. Meanwhile, we need to get Pathfinder ready. Ready for what? Dr. Winters asked. Thomas's eyes held a determined gleam. Ready to run one more time. While Henry made his call to the journalist, Thomas went out to check on Pathfinder. The horse had continued to improve. His coat now had a healthy sheen. His eyes were bright and alert, and his frame had begun to fill out. But more striking was the change in his bearing. He stood taller, his head held, with the quiet confidence of a champion who had remembered his worth. Sarah joined Thomas at the paddock fence. He's magnificent, she said softly. I wish my father could see him now. He'd be proud, Thomas replied, of both of you. You never gave up on finding the truth. Sarah studied Thomas's weathered face. Why are you doing this? You could have sold Pathfinder back to Westbrook, walked away with enough money to save your farm. Instead, you're risking everything. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I've spent my whole life believing that some things matter more than money or safety, truth, justice, standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. He gestured toward Pathfinder. Your father died protecting him, protecting the truth. I couldn't dishonor that sacrifice. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched Pathfinder move gracefully around the paddock. The horse paused, turning his intelligent gaze toward them as if understanding the weight of the moment. Doctor. Winters says he's healthy enough to run, Sarah said eventually. But after everything he's been through, he'll run, Thomas said with quiet certainty. Not because we ask him to, but because it's who he is. Champions don't forget what makes them special, even when the world has forgotten them. By afternoon, their plan was in motion. Rebecca Carson, the investigative journalist, had agreed to publish a cryptic but provocative piece questioning the circumstances of Pathfinder's reported death 5 years earlier. The article would hint at irregularities in Westbrook's breeding program and mention anonymous sources with evidence of wrongdoing. It'll run online tonight and in print tomorrow, Henry reported after finishing his call. Rebecca's putting her career on the line with this. Westbrook's lawyers will be all over her within hours. Which is exactly what we want, Thomas said. Let him focus on her while we prepare for Derby Day. Doctor? Winters had been monitoring police radio frequencies. There's increased activity around the county line. Westbrook's security people are coordinating with local law enforcement, setting up checkpoints. We'll need to move tonight then, Thomas decided. Take back roads to Louisville, stay hidden until Derby Day. They spent the rest of the day preparing gathering supplies, mapping routes, and finalizing their plan for Churchill Downs. Dr. Winters provided medications for Pathfinder, ensuring he would be in peak condition for what lay ahead. As dusk approached, they loaded the horses into Dr. Winters's small trailer. The veterinarian would not be accompanying them. Her presence at Churchill Downs would raise too many questions, but she had provided them with everything they needed. "Be careful," she urged as they prepared to leave. "Westbrook is desperate, and desperate men are the most dangerous." Thomas clasped her hand firmly. "Thank you for everything. When this is over..." She shook her head. "Don't make promises, just make sure Westbrook pays for what he's done." They set off as darkness fell. Henry driving the truck with Thomas beside him. Sarah rode in the back seat monitoring news sites on her laptop for Rebecca's article to appear. Pathfinder traveled quietly in the trailer, occasionally nickering softly as if sensing the importance of their journey. They had been on the road for less than an hour when Sarah's laptop pinged with a notification. "It's up," she announced, her voice tense with anticipation. "Rebecca's article is live." Thomas twisted in his seat to look at the screen. The headline was bold. "Racing mystery was champion Pathfinder's death. A hoax sources suggest foul play at Westbrook stables." "How long before Westbrook sees it?" he asked. "Minutes," Henry replied grimly. "His people monitor everything written about him or his operations." They continued driving, taking obscure county roads that wound through the Kentucky countryside. The lights of farmhouses and small towns glowed in the distance, peaceful and unaware of the storm brewing in their midst. Sarah's phone buzzed. "Rebecca says the article's getting traction. Racing forums are lighting up with speculation, and she's already received calls from other journalists asking for more information." Henry nodded approvingly. "Good. The more noise, the better." As they approached an intersection, Thomas noticed headlights behind them moving fast. "We've got company," he warned. Henry checked the rearview mirror. "Could be nothing." "Turn anyway," Thomas instructed. "Let's not take chances." Henry took a sharp right onto a narrower road. The headlights followed. "Not good," he muttered, accelerating slightly. The pursuing vehicle gained ground rapidly, a black SUV, its high beams flooding their cab with harsh light. "It's them," Sarah whispered, fear edging her voice. Thomas remained calm. "Henry, remember that old logging road near Miller's Creek?" "Can you find it?" Henry nodded tersely. "Might shake them if they're not locals." The SUV was close enough now that Thomas could make out two figures in the front seats. The passenger window rolled down and something extended outward, the unmistakable shape of a gun. "Get down!" Thomas shouted just as the crack of a gunshot split the night. Their rear window exploded inward, showering them with glass. Henry swerved hard, taking a sudden turn onto a rutted dirt path, barely wide enough for their truck and trailer. The SUV followed, fishtailing in the loose dirt but maintaining pursuit. "We can't outrun them with the trailer," Henry shouted over the roar of the engine and the rattling of the truck as it bounced over the rough terrain. Thomas made a split-second decision. "There's a fork ahead. Take the right path. It leads to the old railroad trestle." "The trestle?" Henry looked at him incredulously. "That thing's been condemned for years." "Exactly," Thomas said grimly. "They won't expect us to cross it." The logging road narrowed, further branches scraping against the sides of the trailer as they pushed deeper into the forest. The SUV fell back slightly, struggling with the tight confines, but remained in pursuit. Finally, they reached the fork. Henry took the right path without hesitation, the truck straining as it climbed a steep incline. At the top, the old railroad trestle came into view, a skeletal structure of weathered timber spanning a deep ravine abandoned decades ago when the logging operation had shut down. "Thomas, that thing won't hold us," Henry protested. "It doesn't need to hold them," Thomas replied. "Just slow them down." Understanding dawned on Henry's face. He brought the truck to a stop at the edge of the trestle. "You're insane." "Get Pathfinder ready," Thomas instructed, opening his door. "Sarah, grab the evidence, all of it." They worked quickly, unloading Pathfinder from the trailer. The horse sensed their urgency, standing steady as Thomas mounted bareback, then helped Sarah up behind him. Henry joined them on the other horse. The SUV's headlights appeared at the bottom of the incline, climbing steadily toward them. "When I give the word," Thomas said quietly, "we cross the trestle on horseback. The truck stays here, blocking the entrance." Henry shook his head in disbelief but positioned his horse beside Pathfinder. "Ready when you are, you crazy old man." The SUV was nearly upon them when Thomas gave the signal. "Now!" Pathfinder surged forward, stepping confidently onto the weathered planks of the trestle. Henry's horse followed, more hesitant but trusting its rider. Behind them they heard car doors slam, shouts of anger as Westbrook's men realized what was happening. The trestle groaned beneath the horse's weight, timbers shifting ominously. Thomas kept Pathfinder moving at a steady pace, not too fast to risk a misstep, but quick enough to stay ahead of pursuit. Beneath them, the ravine yawned dark and deep, a river glinting far below in the moonlight. Gunshots rang out, bullets splintering wood around them. Sarah clung tightly to Thomas, her face pressed against his back. They were halfway across now, the ancient structure swaying slightly with each step. "They're coming on foot," Henry called out, glancing back. Two figures had started across the trestle, moving cautiously but with determined speed. Another shot echoed closer this time. Suddenly, a sharp crack split the air, much louder than a gunshot. The trestle shuddered violently. One of the main support beams had given way, weakened by age and their passage. "Ride!" Thomas shouted, urging Pathfinder forward. The champion responded instinctively, his powerful legs carrying them across the failing structure with astonishing speed. They reached solid ground just as the trestle began to collapse in earnest, massive timbers breaking free and plummeting into the ravine. Henry's horse scrambled onto the bank seconds later. Behind them, Westbrook's men retreated frantically, barely escaping the collapsing structure. The pursuit was cut off. The ravine now stood between them and Westbrook's men, the trestle a broken ruin of timber and steel. Thomas patted Pathfinder's neck, feeling the horse's heavy breathing gradually steady. "Good boy," he murmured. "You haven't forgotten how to run when it matters." Sarah's arms were still wrapped tightly around his waist. "That was too close," she whispered. Henry let out a shaky laugh. "Remind me never to follow your shortcuts again, Thomas." They continued through the forest, following game trails that eventually led them to a paved road. By Thomas's estimation, they were now just 30 miles outside of Louisville. With the main routes likely watched, they would stick to back roads, traveling by night and hiding during the day. As they rode through the darkness, Thomas felt Pathfinder's strength beneath him, the steady rhythm of a champion who had found his purpose once more. Tomorrow would bring them to Louisville, and the day after to Churchill Downs, where a century and a half of racing tradition would witness an extraordinary return, and a reckoning long overdue. The dawn mist hung low over Churchill Downs as the first workers arrived to prepare for the biggest day in American horse racing. The Kentucky Derby, with its pageantry and tradition, had drawn the elite of the racing world to Louisville once again. Among them was Robert Westbrook, whose dark Meridian was favored to win this year's Run for the Roses. Thomas Morgan, Henry Davis, and Sarah Mitchell approached from the backside entrance where delivery trucks and service vehicles streamed steadily through the gates. Henry's connection had come through. They had credentials identifying them as staff for Silver Creek Farms, a legitimate breeding operation whose owner owed Henry more favors than he cared to admit. "Remember," Thomas said quietly as they passed through security, "we stay separated until it's time. If one of us is spotted, the others can still complete the mission." Sarah nodded, clutching her backpack containing the evidence that could bring down Westbrook stables. "I'll head to the press area and find Rebecca. She's expecting me." Henry adjusted his cap lower over his eyes. "I'll make sure our special guest arrives safely," he said with a meaningful glance toward the horse trailer they had parked in the service lot. Thomas checked his watch. 3 hours until post time for the Derby. "We meet at the paddock area 15 minutes before, no matter what." They split up, each heading to their assigned positions. Thomas made his way toward the barns, where trainers and grooms prepared their horses for the day's races. His heart pounded against his ribs, not from exertion, but from the enormity of what they were attempting. One wrong move, and they'd be arrested or worse. The grounds of Churchill Downs were a beehive of activity. Jockeys in colorful silks hurried past owners in expensive suits, conferred in hushed tones, and tourists in elaborate derby hats wandered wide-eyed through the historic venue. Thomas kept his head down, moving with purpose, just another worker in the vast machinery of Derby Day. He rounded a corner and froze. 20 yards ahead stood Robert Westbrook, surrounded by associates and security personnel. The racing magnate was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, a gold horsehead pin gleaming on his lapel. He was smiling, but Thomas could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted suspiciously at passers-by. Thomas turned quickly, using a group of spectators as cover. The article had clearly rattled Westbrook just as they'd hoped. Now they needed to ensure their plan unfolded before he could stop them. In the press area, Sarah found Rebecca Carson. Easley, the journalist, was one of the few women in the crowded media center, her red hair visible above the sea of photographers and reporters preparing for the day's coverage. "You're taking an enormous risk coming here," Rebecca said after Sarah approached. They spoke quietly in a corner away from curious ears. "Westbrook's people have been hounding me since the article dropped. They've threatened lawsuits, intimidated my editor, the works." "But you're still here," Sarah observed. Rebecca's eyes flashed with determination. "I've spent years trying to expose corruption in racing. This is the biggest story of my career." She nodded toward Sarah's backpack. "Is that what I think it is?" Sarah patted the bag. "Everything you need to break the story, wide open financial records, experimental data video evidence of my father's murder, and proof that Pathfinder's death was staged." "And the horse?" Rebecca asked, lowering her voice further. "Being prepared as we speak." Meanwhile, Henry had made his way to a small service barn at the far edge of the property. Inside, an old friend, a former jockey named Manny, who now worked as an exercise rider, waited with nervous energy. "I still think you're crazy," Manny said as Henry entered, "but damn if I don't want to see Westbrook get what's coming to him." In the stall behind them stood Pathfinder, groomed to perfection. The transformation was remarkable. His coat gleamed in the dim light, muscles rippling beneath his chestnut hide. 5 years of neglect had been erased in days, revealing the champion that had never truly disappeared. "He looks ready," Henry said, running an expert hand along the horse's flank. Manny nodded. "Been warming him up gentle-like. He remembers the track, I could feel it. Took him out before dawn when nobody was around, and he practically flew." "You remember the timing?" Henry asked, checking his watch. 15 minutes before the Derby. I'll have him at the paddock entrance." "After that?" Manny shrugged. "Well, I reckon all hell's going to break loose anyway." As the hours ticked by, the Derby crowd swelled to capacity. Over 150,000 spectators filled the grandstands and infield, a colorful mosaic of finery and festivity. Millions more watched on television, unaware that the day's biggest story would not be which horse crossed the finish line first. Robert Westbrook made his way to the owner's section, surrounded by his entourage. His dark meridian had drawn the coveted 5th post position and was holding steady as the 3, one favorite. Yet despite his horse's prospects, Westbrook seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone and conferring with his security chief. The mysterious article about Pathfinder had spread like wildfire through racing circles. Old questions had resurfaced, rumors had reignited. Westbrook's public relations team had worked overtime to dismiss the story as baseless speculation. But the damage was done. People were talking, wondering, questioning, exactly as Thomas had planned. At the appointed time, Thomas approached the paddock area where the Derby contenders were being prepared. Security was tight, but his credentials got him through the initial checkpoints. He spotted Sarah with Rebecca near the media corral, positioned strategically where the cameras would have a clear view. A text from Henry confirmed everything was ready. Thomas took a deep breath and gave the signal a casual adjustment of his cap. The paddock erupted in commotion as Pathfinder appeared at the far entrance, Manny leading him with quiet confidence. The champion moved with fluid grace, his presence commanding immediate attention. A hush fell over the nearest spectators, followed by a ripple of confused murmurs. "Is that... It can't be. Looks just like..." Thomas stepped forward into the open space, raising his voice to be heard. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to reintroduce a champion you were told was dead. This is Pathfinder." The name sent a shockwave through the crowd. Phones were raised, cameras turned, security personnel started moving toward Thomas, but hesitated, uncertain how to handle the situation. Thomas continued, his voice growing stronger. 5 years ago, Robert Westbrook announced this horse had died of natural causes. He held a memorial service and collected millions in insurance money. But as you can see, Pathfinder is very much alive. From the owner's area, Westbrook had frozen in place, his face draining of color as he stared at the horse he had thought would never be seen again. Then, recovering his composure, he began pushing through the crowd, signaling frantically to his security team. Rebecca Carson was already broadcasting live on social media, her camera trained on Pathfinder as Sarah opened her laptop, displaying documents and video footage on the screen for the world to see. "We have evidence," Sarah called out, her voice clear and steady, "that Robert Westbrook faked Pathfinder's death to cover up illegal experimentation and doping. We have proof that he murdered my father, Thomas Mitchell, to silence him." Security guards converged from all directions, but it was too late. The story was out, cameras were rolling, and Pathfinder, the living proof of their accusations, stood proudly before the stunned Derby crowd. Robert Westbrook pushed his way to the front, his face contorted with rage. "This is preposterous. That's not Pathfinder, it's just a similar-looking horse. These people are con artists trying to extort money." Thomas stood his ground as Westbrook approached. "Every horse has unique markings, Mr. Westbrook. Pathfinder's DNA will match your records. The microchip your stable implanted is still in his neck. Would you like to explain to these people why a dead horse is standing here today?" Westbrook's composure cracked. With unexpected speed, he lunged at Thomas, grabbing him by the shirt. "You have no idea what you've done," he hissed. Thomas didn't flinch. "I know exactly what I've done. I've exposed the truth." Security personnel finally intervened, separating the men, but the damage to Westbrook was already done. His public assault had been captured by dozens of cameras, his wild-eyed rage broadcast live to millions. A man in a suit approached, flashing a badge. "FBI," he announced quietly. "We've been monitoring this situation since Miss Carson's article appeared." He turned to Sarah. "We'll need that evidence, Miss Mitchell." As Sarah handed over her backpack, more federal agents appeared, moving purposefully through the crowd. One approached Westbrook, speaking words that carried clearly in the sudden hush. "Robert Westbrook, you're under arrest for fraud, animal cruelty, and suspicion of murder." The racing magnate's face twisted in disbelief as the agent continued reading his rights. His security team, seeing federal badges, stepped back, unwilling to interfere. Thomas moved to Pathfinder's side, placing a steadying hand on the horse's neck. The champion stood calmly amidst the chaos, his intelligent eyes taking in the scene as if understanding the significance of the moment. In the days that followed, the story dominated headlines across the country. The FBI investigation uncovered the full scope of Project Thoroughbred, not just race fixing and illegal doping, but a sophisticated operation developing performance-enhancing compounds for human use. The scandal rocked the racing world, leading to widespread reforms and multiple indictments. Forensic evidence from the recovered data confirmed that Robert Westbrook had indeed murdered Thomas Mitchell, pushing him to his death before disposing of the body. Westbrook was charged with first-degree murder along with dozens of counts of fraud, animal cruelty, and racketeering. 1 week after Derby Day, Thomas stood at the fence of his farm, watching as Pathfinder galloped freely across the green pasture. The horse ran with joy, his powerful strides eating up the ground, his head held high. He was home not at some prestigious racing stable with marble fountains and manicured lawns, but at a simple farm where he could simply be a horse again. Sarah walked up beside Thomas, a small smile playing on her lips. "He seems happy." "He is," Thomas replied. "No more experiments, no more races, just grass and sky and freedom." "The FBI investigator called this morning," she said. "They've frozen Westbrook's assets, but they're releasing the insurance money he collected on Pathfinder, since technically he never owned the horse legally. Once he reported him dead, the funds will go to us as the legal custodians." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "That's a fair bit of money." "Enough to save this place," Sarah confirmed, "and to start something new." She handed him a brochure she designed, "The Mitchell Morgan Sanctuary for Retired and Rescued Racehorses." Thomas studied the brochure, emotion tightening his throat. Your father would be proud. Of both of us, Sarah added softly. You could have walked away at any point, taken Westbrook's money, saved your farm the easy way. But you chose what was right over what was easy. Thomas gazed back at Pathfinder, who had stopped running and now stood watching them from the center of the field, his presence commanding even in repose. Some horses are born to run races, Thomas said thoughtfully. Others are born to teach us what it means to have heart, to survive, to stand tall even when the world has written you off. He smiled. I think Pathfinder was always meant for the greater purpose. Henry's truck rumbled up the driveway, kicking up dust. He climbed out, waving a newspaper. Front page again, he called as he approached. Westbrook's being denied bail. Too much of a flight risk, judge said. The three of them stood in comfortable silence, watching as Pathfinder trotted toward them, no longer afraid, no longer broken. You know, Henry said finally, there are other stables out there running similar operations, not as big as Westbrook's, but just as cruel. The FBI is already asking for our help identifying them. Thomas exchanged a glance with Sarah. I suppose our work isn't done then. Sarah's eyes gleamed with determination, her father's determination. It's just beginning. As if in agreement, Pathfinder lifted his head and let out a powerful neigh that echoed across the farm, the sound of a champion who had found his true purpose and the humans who had found theirs alongside him. In the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but here, in this moment, the sun shone bright on a new beginning. The old racehorse had come home, carrying with him not just the truth about his own story, but the promise of justice for others like him. And in that promise lay the greatest victory of all, far more meaningful than any race he had ever run. Thomas Morgan placed his weathered hand on the fence post, feeling the solid wood beneath his palm, a reminder that some things in this world still stood strong and true. Welcome home, Pathfinder, he whispered. Welcome home.